Shalom. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahabushai, Bahashem, Racha Kodash. I want to give double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, because those are the men who I learned this truth from through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahabushai. Yahweh is the true name of the God of Israel. Yahabushai is who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, but his one and only true name is Yahabushai. And pretty much this is going to be a video about mamzers and what determines your nationality, your identity, the culture you're going to take upon as an individual on the planet Earth, which is determined by the seed of your fathers. Now, if you come from the seed of the promise, which is the so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians, the biblical Israelites, that makes you an Israelite according to your father's seed. The word seed in the Greek, going back to the Greek word sperma, which means seed or semen. The semen is a man's seed that he implants within a woman. She nurtures that seed and caters to that seed and nourishes that seed for 9 months, and then she gives birth to that man's seed. Every single person on the planet Earth is a descendant from one of the 18 nations in the Bible, but the only chosen nation or chosen seed line on the planet Earth is who? The so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians, which are the biblical Israelites, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his 12 sons, known as the 12 patriarchs. All right? So without further ado, we're going to get into it, because you have a lot of different Hebrew Israelite camps that don't all teach the same thing. And just because they call themselves a Hebrew Israelite camp, that doesn't mean that they have the Holy Spirit, which is the breath spoken about in the Old Testament. That doesn't mean that they have the Holy Spirit, which is the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to make you wise unto salvation based off of the doctrine that they're teaching. All right? So you have particular people, they come in like this super over-righteous Old Testament spirit, where they only teach the Torah only. They may not believe in the Messiah, whose real name is Yahabushai. They may say that you're a heathen because, you know, your mother is a heathen, or just judge you on the outward appearance, when the Lord, he looketh upon the spirit. But you're going to have Israelites on an outward appearance. They look like heathens. They look like our oppressors. They look like the different nations that conquered and subdued us, but they are descendants from the seed of the promise. All right? So you got to understand the distinction here at Great Millstone. We don't teach, which is according to the Bible, that the 17 heathen nations can receive salvation and be joint heirs with our inheritance. That's not in the Bible. That's not what the Most High said. We're telling you that you're going to have Israelites that on the outward appearance look like actual heathens, but their nationality, meaning their seed line, goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right? So now let's get into it. So this is what I typed in on Google, right? Israel having mixed marriages in the Apocryphal Old Testament, right? It says mixed marriages in the Old Testament were a major point of tension, while the biblical text recounts many prominent figures taking foreign wives, such as who? Moses, King Solomon, King David, all throughout the scriptures, right? It says the later prophetic and historical books strictly condemn the practice. Why is the practice condemned? Because it goes back to the law. But what is the law actually saying when you read it? The Lord, he was warning Israel that you're going to end up loving these surrounding nations' women, right? Your concubines, and your heart, meaning your mind, is going to end up forsaking me because you love these heathen concubine women so much. You're going to forsake the law, statutes, and commandments. You're not going to raise your children up to keep the laws, statutes, and commandments, and that's going to lead to Yahweh becoming a jealous God and bringing upon us the curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28. That's what the Most High through the prophets, right? First beginning with Moses, that's what he was warning us about. The Most High is not worried about if an Israelite man has sex with a heathen woman and then she gets pregnant, because that's going to be that Israelite man's seed. You see the difference? But with an Israelite woman, that's not the same case. Women don't carry seed. So if a woman gets pregnant, or an Israelite woman from one of the 12 tribes of Israel get pregnant by a heathen nation, that's that heathen man's seed. You see the difference? We're going to go through the examples in this lesson. It says, these prohibitions were based on religion, right? The philosophies of the heathen, the customs of the heathen, which all the heathens are nothing but idolaters and fornicators, doing things that go against the law, statutes, and commandments. So that's what Yahweh, first beginning with Moses and then the rest of the prophets, was warning the children of Israel about. All right? It says, and religious purity, not modern concepts of race or ethnicity. Let's go down here. The narrative around mixed marriages in the Old Testament can be broken down into two distinct approaches. It says, let's go down here, narrative acceptance and inclusion. In earlier historical stories, prominent Israelites frequently married foreign women without being judged by the text. Exactly. Let's look at some examples here. The patriarchs. Abraham married Keturah, and Joseph married Asenath, an Egyptian. Did Joseph worship Asenath's gods? No. Did Abraham worship Keturah's gods? No. That's why they're not used as an example on what not to do. But who is mainly used as an example on what not to do? King Solomon. All right? It's a difference. Check out Moses. He married Zipporah, a Midianite, and later a Cushite. All right? And Moses' example, it's a beautiful example, because his wife, she I got to go back to the account, but she circumcised her son Gershom, if I'm not mistaken. All right? That's how it's supposed to be. When we married the heathen woman and they had our children, the heathen woman is supposed to come under our order, our authority, our customs, our belief system, our religious practices. We go off when we start following their culture, their way of life, keeping their religious practices. That causes us to sin before the Lord. That's why the Lord said, don't marry them. Why? Because your heart, meaning your mind, the actions you're going to do because you love them, you know, they're going to turn away your spirit for following Yahweh, right? Kings and leaders. King David married Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah the Hittite, and King Solomon married women from various surrounding nations. The book of Ruth. This book famously highlights Ruth, a Moabite widow who married Boaz and became the great-grandmother of King David. And through that lineage, that's how the Messiah came about, to fulfill prophecy. All right? It says, legal and prophetic condemnation. As Israel established its religious and national identity, the law of Moses began to explicitly restrict intermarriage to prevent the adoption of pagan practices, right? The Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, which means the second book of the law, explicitly warns against intermarrying with the Canaanites out of fear, that's the key thing, that it would lead the Israelites into idolatry and away from the Most High. Everything I just said. Ezra and Nehemiah. Following the Babylonian exile, these books strictly forbid mixed marriages with the surrounding peoples. The leaders viewed intermarriage as a direct threat to the survival of the Israelite community, famously demanding that the men divorce their foreign wives to maintain religious purity. But even if your woman is a heathen, you know, don't just put her away. Just understand that she has to come under your authority. All right? You know, now we're not solving the independent. Things is worse now, but we have grace through Yahweh's blood and sacrifice, to where we're not hold to that old covenant standard we can't keep in sinful flesh. All right? But still don't follow their practices, even to this day. It says the primary concern was not ethnic but spiritual. Foreign spouses, right, heathen women, were viewed as a danger to the covenant because they often brought the worship of other gods into Israelite households. All right, that's where men sinned. Not by having sex with them and having kids with them, but by keeping their religious practices of the heathen, right, and the worship of other gods, bringing them into your household. That's what caused Israelite men to sin. All right, now let's get into the scriptures. So now, this is Deuteronomy. Let's read it in the NLT. It's more simpler. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1, NLT. It says, when the Lord your God, the word Lord is in caps, so it's referring to Yahweh, right? When the Lord your God, because that's our God, the God of Israel, brings you into the land, the promised land of Israel, you are about to enter and occupy, he will clear away many nations ahead of you. All these different Canaanite tribes. I'm going to skip down. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous than you because they was already established. Remember, we pretty much got established last. All right? All these other nations, they already had a culture. They had their own creation stories. They had their own customs. They was already sovereign and independent. We wasn't. We became a nation in exile, right? In captivity. Verse 2, when Yahweh your God hands these nations over to you and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. Make no treaties with them and show them no mercy. That's what the Most High said to do. He said to kill them, right? Talking about them Canaanites in our land. It says, you must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and your sons marry their sons and daughters. Now, a lot of you people that read this particular chapter in scripture, you take it way out of context. This is strictly talking about the land of Canaan during this time. The Lord was saying what? To completely destroy the Canaanites, destroy their altars, destroy everything. This is what the Lord is commanding while we're going to the promised land of Israel and when we in the promised land of Israel. All right? This is strictly talking about that. It says, verse 4, it says, for they will lead your children away from me to worship other gods. That's why King Solomon mainly is used as an example on what not to be like. But he got like that when he got old. When you get older, you get weaker in spirit and mind, right? It says, then the anger of the Lord, because he's a jealous God, will burn against you and he will quickly destroy you. And that's what's happened all throughout history up until this day, right? It says, this is what you must do. You must break down their pagan altars and scatter their scarce pillars. Cut down their ASHHAWAR poles and burn their idols. It says, for you are a holy people who belong to Yahweh your God. Of all the people on earth, Yahweh your God has chosen you to be his own special treasure. The Lord did not set his heart on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other nations, for you were the smallest of all nations, because we wasn't established yet. All right? It says, rather, it was simply that Yahweh loves you, the seed line of Israel only, and he was keeping the oath he has sworn to your ancestors, the fathers of the promise, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he will bring us into the promised land of Israel, and in future generations we will have rest, right? But for right now, we got to go through these different learning experiences on living life to see what happens when you go against Yahweh, our God. This is the reality. Deuteronomy 28, you're going to have problems with relationships, jobs, even towards the brothers talking shit about, like, you're going to have all that going on. Division amongst our people, the northern kingdom being against the southern kingdom being racist towards the northern kingdom. People not realizing we got the same customs. Whether we fled into Africa or the lost 10 tribes of Israel came over here to ASSHUR, the Americas, we was keeping the same customs. All right? So that's what's going on with our people. So this is what we have to learn. Wickedness before we become gods in righteousness and be perfect by being balanced. Because that's what the angel said in Genesis, the 3rd chapter. Oh, man is becoming like us, knowing good and evil. You read Isaiah 45:7. What does it say about Yahweh, the most perfect God? It says that what? He's good and evil, which is what? Balance. So that's what we're learning. We're learning the wickedness before we're 100% righteous, when we receive salvation and step into that new covenant first as the elect of the nation of Israel. All right? That is why Yahweh rescued you with such a strong hand from your slavery and from the oppressive hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Understand, therefore, that Yahweh your God is indeed the Most High. He is the faithful power who keeps his covenant for 1,000 generations, meaning forever, and lavishes his unfailing love on those who love him and obey his commandments. But he does not hesitate to punish and destroy those who reject him. Therefore, you must obey all these command decrees, right? Law, statutes, and commandments, and regulations I am giving you today. All right? And then the chapter goes into the blessings, which can also be found in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 7, as well as Deuteronomy 28. All right? Which this is Deuteronomy 7. So now let's go here. So now let's read about King Solomon. Because people love to use King Solomon as an example, but why is he mainly used as an example? Because he was worshiping and keeping the practices of his heathen concubines, which results in what? Idolatry and fornication and sin. Yeah, he was the wisest man on earth when he was younger, but when he got older, he was used as an example, all right? It's just predestination. This is just how the Lord set particular things up through predestination so that we can learn, all right? Continuing on. NLT version. Solomon, many wives. 1 Kings 11:1. It says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. KJV is going to say strange wives, right? It says, besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, so-called Asian Chinese people, right? The Moabite woman is beautiful. You know, you look at them in Thailand, you know, Pattaya, Phuket. I be watching them YouTube videos, the travel videos. Them woman is gorgeous, right? Solomon had a cluster of them. Ammon, so-called Japanese, right? Them Japanese women is fine too, right? Edom, there's some gorgeous, beautiful looking Edomite women, all right? They working out, they got some ass now, they got titties. I mean, shit, a lot of them look better than sisters, right? Solomon, he had a cluster of them. It says Sidon, right? So-called African woman, right? It says, and from among the Hittites, another tribe of African women, right? Indigenous African women. That's not Israel, because this is going in the heathens. It says, the Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, right? You must not marry them. Why? Because they will turn your hearts, meaning your minds, to their gods. Yet, Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. So, this is what you need to understand. When a man really loves his woman, but he's given a woman too much authority, or he loves her so much, he could forsake his God in the process. That's what I want you to understand. This is a point that needs to be brought out more, all right? Because men will do anything for women. You know, the pussy is good, she's beautiful, right? So that's what it said. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. So he loved them so much, that's where this love turned into, in the form of his actions. He has 700 wives of royal birth, because the Israelite woman is royal, all right? Only they can be wives, upper class wives, right? And 300 concubines, which is a sub-wife, a lower wife, right? It says, and in fact, they did turn his heart, meaning his mind, away from Yahweh. So that's what happened. He loved them so much that he forsaken his own God in the process. That's what you need to understand. Because you love these particular heathen women so much that it leads to your actions forsaking your God in the process. And it could be a slow thing. Next thing you know, you engulfed by love. All right? It says, in Solomon's old age, this is another thing. Solomon sinned when he got older. All right? You know how older people are, right? It says they turned his heart, meaning his mind, to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to Yahweh, his God, as his father David had been, right? Solomon worshiped Ashereth. When you worship these gods, it comes with particular religious practices, religious ceremonies, certain vile acts you got to do, right? Just do your research. All these different gods, just see what some of the practices of worshiping these different gods. Solomon was doing it. I don't care how extreme or bizarre it is, he was doing this shit, right? It says, the goddess of the Sidonians and Molech, the detestable, meaning abominable, god of the Ammonites, right? So-called Japanese people. It says, in this way, Solomon did what was evil in Yahweh's sight. He refused to follow Yahweh completely, as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the abominable or detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So you see where his love is leading to? His love is leading to what? Him forsaking Yahweh, setting up these different gods all over Israel. Yeah, he was the wisest man when he was younger, but as he got older, it's sin, and this is why you have the kingdom of Israel, known as the northern kingdom of Israel, and then you got the southern kingdom, all right? It says, yep, he refused to follow Yahweh completely as his father David had done. Let's go down here, verse 8. It says, Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. Because he loved them, he wanted to make them happy. It says, Yahweh was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He has sworn Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to Yahweh's command. And how do you listen to Yahweh's command? It could be in the form of a dream, but also by the mouth of the prophets. All right? So now Yahweh said to him, since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, going back to the oath promises, right? I will not do this while you are still alive. That's mercy. I will take the kingdom away from your son. And even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city. All right? Which is going into what? The southern kingdom. All right? And then later on down the line, when you get to like the Roman Empire, that's the Jews. That's the Christians as well, which are Jews that followed the Messiah. All right? Because during that time of Rome, the northern kingdom, when you read 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter, verses 40 through 46, they was already on the other side of the world, in Ashereth, which is the Americas, Central, South, North America, Canada, different Caribbean islands, to fulfill prophecy. All right? So that's what happened. So the Lord took the kingdom away. And as you read down, it goes into that. All right? So that's why he's used as an example. Now, this is after the fact. This is a different generation now, right? This is Nehemiah 13 and 22. I'm reading it in the NLT. This is Nehemiah 13 and 22 NLT version. It says, Nehemiah 13:23. About the same time, I realized that some of the men of Judah had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Furthermore, half their children spoke the language of Ashdod or of some other people and could not speak the language of Judah at all. So they wasn't even speaking Paleo-Hebrew. Because remember, when you read Genesis, the 10th and 11th chapter, you know, the Lord, he had broken up the languages. When you actually compare different languages and different words, like words in Italian, words in Portuguese, words in Spanish, words in English, they're similar sounding words. Like, I'll give you an example, right? Because chick I'm dealing with, you know, she Northern Kingdom, ASHUR. Now, a word like obviously, in Spanish, they'll say obvio. It's very similar. You see what I'm saying? So it's certain words you could use that's similar to somebody else's language, all right? Which is kind of proof that we all used to speak the same language and understand each other once upon a time before the Lord broke the languages up, all right? But the point is, these children in this particular generation, they couldn't speak Paleo-Hebrew. They were speaking the language of their heathen mothers. So that pissed Nehemiah off because he's seeing his people discontinue from their heritage. He's seeing a falling away. He's seeing how his people is becoming in a Gentile state of mind. All right? I want to read this in the KJV. This is Nehemiah 13:23. It says, in those days also I saw Jews that had married wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and of Moab. And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. So they wasn't speaking Paleo-Hebrew. All right? They wasn't even speaking Aramaic. It says, back in the NLT, verse 25, because you know Nehemiah, he was a rough prophet. It says, so I confronted them and called down curses on them. I beat some of them and pulled out their hair. I made them swear in the name of Yahweh that they would not let their children intermarry with the pagan people of the land. Because that's what the heathen nations are. They're pagan people. They're people that's outside of the temple with different cultures, different belief systems, different religious practices, right? Here comes Solomon as the example. Because what is Nehemiah doing? He's implementing the law. It says, wasn't this exactly what led King Solomon of Israel into sin? Yeah, when he got older. I demanded there was no king from any nation who could compare to him, because he was the wisest man on earth. It says, and the Most High loved him and made him king over all Israel, but even he was led into sin by his foreign wives. Let you know what? You can't really put no man on no pedestal. You could compliment a man, but the flattery and trying to reverence him on a high level, that could lead to that man being jacked up. Jacked up, judged. The Lord temporarily could put a reprobate spirit on him, just so that everybody that esteem him high don't worship him as like a demigod, or put him on equal level and footing with Yahweh and Yahawashi. That happens, all right? I even have my own, personal testimonies, all right? There's other testimonies, people that used to go to One West. The Most High could do that. That don't mean that he gonna completely destroy an individual and completely forget, their righteousness. But as men get older, they get weaker. And men is in the flesh, meaning what? They're gonna sin, all right? But through Yahawashi, blood, sacrifice, and resurrection, they can repent and they can be forgiven, all right? Continuing on, NLT. How could you even think of committing this sinful deed by acting unfaithfully toward Yahweh by marrying a foreign woman? It's not about having sex, all right, and having a foreign wife. It's about you keeping their practices when they supposed to come under your authority, all right? So that's it with that. So now, let's get into this. Now, I typed in Men of Israel marrying strange wives, forsaking God, right? Because this world don't know Yahweh. They don't know the God of Israel. Even though we proclaiming his name, and his name is going to be proclaimed throughout all the earth when Babylon the Great, which is America, is destroyed, right? Ultimately, by this gospel spreading so that the end could come. But, you know, you got to type in words like God, Jesus. You got to do that, all right? The biblical account of Israelite men marrying strange wives, foreign women, who led them away from Yahweh is primarily found in Ezra, the 9th and the 10th chapter, and Nehemiah, the 13th chapter. This intermarriage with surrounding pagan nations, aka heathen nations, nations that's profane outside the temple, right, directly violated Yahweh's commands, such as those in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, as is introduced, idolatry, which, once again, you can't just take that and say, oh, you can't have sex with them. Because there's plenty of accounts of us having sex with heathen women, even us as the sons of God. When you trace that lineage of the sons of God, they still exist today. But they're known as the Israelites. What are the Israelites? Sons of God, sons of Yahweh, princes of Yahweh, right? When you read Genesis, the 5th and the 6th chapter, we saw the other nations that they were beautiful. King Solomon did the same thing. We all, I mean, most of us have done that. Some brothers, you know, they prefer to deal with the woman of the tribes. I'm one of them, but I just don't fuck with the Southern Kingdom like that. I don't. As far as the woman, I don't fuck with that shit no more here. You know, I like my woman from ASSHUR. They're Israelites. They're gorgeous. That's what I like. All right. I'm entitled to be with who I want to be with through predestination. But some brothers, they like the woman here. You know, the American woman and stuff like that. Some brothers got so-called white woman, so-called Asian woman, so-called Japanese woman, women of different sea lines. All right. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Just don't keep their religious practices and worship their gods. That's it. That's why the Most High, he kept saying what? They're going to turn away your heart. He didn't say not to have sex with them. He said they're going to turn away your heart, meaning your mind, because you love them. King Solomon, he loved his concubines. What did that result to? Him setting up pillars and altars and keeping the religious practices of the heathen nations. That's how he sinned. All right? So stop, you know, y'all got to stop using Deuteronomy 7 to say that you can't have sex with heathen women. Just don't keep their fucking practices. That's it. As it introduced, and back then, the Lord was talking about what? The different Canaanite tribes that was in the land of Israel. He gave a strict command. We should have followed it. Even when you read in Genesis, right? The Lord said what? Don't deal with the Canaanites. But who deal with the Canaanites? Esau, because he wicked. He profane. He out the temple. He a heathen. He ain't gonna listen to the Most High. He don't worship the Most High, right? It says, introduce idolatry, comprise the community's spiritual purity, and ultimately led to forsaking of Yahweh's covenant. Covenant meaning agreement. Here are the key aspects of this historical and spiritual crisis. It's a crisis, right? The core transgression, the law versus the reality. Yahweh explicitly warned Israel not to intermarry with the indigenous people of the land, fearing the foreign spouses, heathen women, would turn the Israelites' hearts, meaning their mind, towards false gods. And there's a lot of examples of that. King Solomon being the main one, right? The spread of idolatry. Because the men marry women who actively practice pagan religions, the Israelites began adopting detestable local practices and abandoning the commandments of Yahweh. The reaction of Ezra. I'm about to read a little bit about that. Because Ezra, he was so hurt seeing that it goes into him praying to the Most High, right? When the priest and scribe Ezra learned that even the religious leaders and priests were intermarrying, he was devastated, tearing his garments and weeping, which is the sign of what? Mourning. Plucking out the hair, plucking out the beard, putting ash on your head. That's a sign of mourning. All right, cutting your head bald. That's a sign of mourning. It says, he offered a deeply moving public prayer. That's what I was just quoting. acknowledging the deep guilt and historical failure of the nation. Daniel did the same thing. Ezra did the same thing. Prophets did that. Because this is the reality, right? Then to know, like, there's going to be other nations that's going to rule in future generations. The Lord ain't going to restore us yet. I'm talking about back during that generation, the mindset of a prophet. You're going to have to die and come back. And then you know when you die and come back in the reincarnation, you're going to have to learn all over again. Your parents is going to be Gentiles, you know, all type of shit they be thinking about. So they be in mourning like, damn, I'm going to have to come back. This shit going to be even worse next time. That's why we hoping and praying that this is the last, you know, generation, man. We hoping that this is the time period, meaning this present generation, when Yahweh sends Yahawashi back. Because this shit is a lot to deal with. You know, going through the curses, dealing with wicked Israelites in the camp, you know, dealing with respect of persons, people bearing false witness, spreading rumors, the world being against you. This a lot of shit to deal with in these weak-ass bodies, all right? So we need Yahawashi. That's the point. When you see the reality of how we fucked up as a nation, we need Yahawashi. That's the point, all right? Your woman out of order, people sick, you need Yahawashi. He's the physician. He's going to heal us. He's bringing healing into his wings. All right? Continuing on. That's how you should be thinking. You should look at the world and all your life experiences and filter it through the scriptures. You don't get mad at the Most High. The Most High teaching us a lesson while we alive on the planet Earth. All right? That's why we going through these different experiences. It's learning lessons. But we got to have faith. It says he offered a deeply moving public prayer, right? Let's go down here. Acknowledging the deep guilt and historical failure of the nation, the drastic resolution. Recognizing that this behavior had pushed Israel to the brink of ruin, a public assembly was called in Jerusalem. The community collectively repented and made a covenant with the Most High to separate from their foreign wives and the children born to these unions, which honestly they were going off. The intent was right, but you don't just cast them completely off, because the kids is Israelites. The kids are Israelites. You are what your father is, according to what? Your father's seed. All right? His father's father's father, according to the seed. Back then, it wasn't no thing of like faith. You know, I believe I'm an Israelite of faith. Nah, we physically had the records to prove that we were Israelites. But once we got to like the Babylonian captivity, that's when we completely lost that. All right? Then it became a thing of faith and really just knowing. But in the future right now, it's through faith, because we completely discontinue from our heritage. But what's end time prophecy? Ezekiel 37, plenty of scriptures. Genesis 49, right? 2nd Ezra 13, 40 through 46. Jeremiah 50, 33. All that breaks down the tribes right there. Where they would be at, they would be oppressed together. Look, it ain't even just America, even though that's only strictly talking about America in Jeremiah 50 and 33. But if you actually got on a plane and like traveled to Central South America, there's so much Southern Kingdom there. It'll blow your mind. They don't speak no English, but they look just like you. They act similar to you, and then they look up to you, because in the spirit they know, like, okay, this is like the main boat. This is Judite right here. All right? So, you know, the scriptures say what? Judah is whom thy brethren shall praise. Judah prevailed above his brethren, right? So the other tribes, they look up to Judah. So what did the Edomites and Heathen do? They subdued Judah. Subduing the leader, you subdue everybody that's under the leader. All right? Continuing on. So they were going off doing this. But, you know, they did it in sincerity. But these kids were still Israelites. The book of Ezra concludes with a list of specific men who pledged to put away their foreign wives to restore the spiritual purity of Israel. So that's it with that. Let's read a little bit about it. And then we're going to go into Mamzer. All right? Which I might just do a separate video on that. I'll just do a separate video on that. This is, I'm going to finish it off with this, and then I'll do another lesson. Ezra 9 and 1. concerning mixed marriages, right? Let's read this in the NLT version. This is Ezra 9:1 NLT version. Ezra's prayer concerning intermarriage, right? It says, when these things had been done, the Israelite leaders came to me and said, many of the people of Israel, and even some of the priests and Levites, have not kept themselves separate from other peoples living in the land, which is a natural thing to do. That's going to happen. They have taken up the detestable, meaning abominable practices of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites, right? For the men of Israel have married women, meaning they have sex with them, right? Sex consummates, meaning finalizes the marriage, right? For the men of Israel have married women from these people and have taken them as wives for their sons. So the holy race has become polluted by these mixed marriages. Worse yet, the leaders and officials have led the way in this outrage. It says, verse 3, it says, when I heard this, I tore my cloak and my shirt, pulled hair from my head and beard, and sat down utterly shocked. This is a sign of mourning, right? Because he knows what this is going to lead to. It's going to lead to judgment from the Most High. It says, then all who troubled at the words of the God of Israel came and sat with me because of this outrage committed by the returned exiles. It says, and I sat there utterly appalled until the time of the evening sacrifice, because they will offer up 3 sacrifices a day under that old system, the Levitical priesthood, all right? It says, at the time of the sacrifice, I stood up from where I had sat in the morning with my clothes torn. I fell to my knees and lifted my hands to Yahweh my God, right? And then he starts to pray, all right? That's his prayer. So you can read that yourself. So that's pretty much it. You know, Lord willing, you was edified by the lesson. Shalom.